How's it going? Welcome to my review of the Grimsmo Norseman. So, before we get started, this is my first knife review. I've been a long time consumer of knife reviews, but this is the first one that I have done. So, if the lighting is bad, the camera angle's off, or the sound quality is crap, that's because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing when it comes to making video content. So, just keep that in mind as we go. So, with that disclaimer aside, let's get into it. So, first I'll go through some size and weight measurements, and I'm not going to make you watch me measure all these, but these are my actual measurements. I did this with my calipers that I stole from my reloading bench. So, blade length, we are looking at 3.65 inches. Sharpen length is 3.4 inches. The blade stock is 0.125 inches, or 1/8 of an inch. And the thickness behind the edge is 20 thousandths, measured about right here. And bear in mind that this is my sharpening job, so I don't know what thickness behind the edge was from the factory. I might have changed the angle a little bit, or this could have been sharpened a couple times. I bought this used, so just keep that in mind. But either way, 20 thousandths behind the edge after being sharpened a couple times. This is a very slicey knife, very thin behind the edge. The handle is 5 inches. From here to here. The scale stock thickness is also 1/8. So these titanium, it's 6.4 titanium or 6AL 4V titanium handles, and they're about 1/8 inch thick as well. The height of the handle is right at 1 inch and 1/8, and then the closed overall height is 1.4, so not quite 1.5 inches wide there, not counting the flipper tab. And then the overall length comes in at 8.65 inches. So let's go through this knife, and then, well, let's do some size comparisons first. Every knife review has to have size comparisons, right? So let's compare it to the standard obligatory budget knives in a Rat Model 2. And way bigger than Rat Model 2. And of course the Rat Model 1. And it is actually pretty comparable in size to a Rat Model 1. So keep in mind, my camera is at a bit of an angle, so the knife on top will look smaller than it actually is. See if we can flip them. So, but if you have a Rat Model 1, this knife is very similar in size to a Rat Model 1. A little bit thinner through the handle and in the pocket. But overall, that's a very comparable size. So let's compare it to a Spyderco Delica. Every knife lover should own a Spyderco Delica at one point in time. This one is the DLT trading exclusive with the 20 CV blade. So the wife bought this for me for Valentine's Day. So awesome Valentine's Day gift. Let's compare it to some more high-end knives. How about the godfather of folding knives? This is a small Sebenza 21. In a raindrop Damascus, and then one of my favorite all-time knives, and the knife that pretty much every modern folding knife is going to be compared to, the large Sebenza 21. And when I was going through and looking at purchasing a Norseman, this is the comparison I wanted to see the most, mostly because this is probably one of the knives that I've carried the most in my life. Well, in my older life, once I could afford it. But it is pretty comparable in size. So the Norseman is about, let's see if I can line them up here, is maybe 1/4 inch longer overall length. See if you can, yeah. So I believe, I haven't measured it in a while, but I believe that the large Sebenza is a 3.5 inch blade, 4.5 inch handle. So just, 8.5 inch overall, I believe, and the Norseman, 8.65 is what I got, so just slightly longer, mostly in the handle. But there you go. We'll bring this one back out and compare some other things with it later. Here it is against the final one. This is the XM18. So if you're looking at a Norseman, it's probably safe to assume that you have a Sebenza or an XM18 already, so I figure this is a good comparison. If you don't, maybe you should pick one of those guys up first. So the old, what they called it, the Holy Trinity of knives was a XM18 and a Sabenza, and then I believe a Strider. So I do not have a Strider, but I mean, for all Strider also went out of business. I think he just makes custom knives now. But for all intents and purposes, as far as I'm concerned, this is now the Holy Trinity of, folding knives. So let's get a little bit more in detail. So the blade steel is RWL34. It is made by Damastil out of Sweden. And this is the first RWL34 knife I have owned. I have owned a ton of CPM 154 knives made by, that's a steel made by Crucible out of the US. As far as I know, the chemical makeup of RWL34 and CPM 154 is very similar, so close to be basically just comparable. I think RWL34 I read has some extra vanadium, but for all intents and purposes, it's the same steel. And Grimsmo recently switched to using CPM 154 and the newer Norseman, mostly because they're having trouble getting RWL34 with the coronavirus and all the issues that have come along with that. But yeah, basically the same steel. So if you have some experience with CPM 154, this is basically the same thing. It is cryo-treated, so my understanding basically is that means that they super cool the steel with liquid nitrogen, like a 5-hour soak in liquid nitrogen or something like that. After they quench it, I think they do a snap temper afterwards. They quench it, snap temper it, and then super cool it. And supposedly that helps transform any remaining austenite to martensite. Makes for a more uniform, harder blade. The steel, RWL34 and CPM 154, are both powder metallurgy steel, which means that in the process when they make the steel, they form it into a powder, and that makes the steel be more uniform chemically, and then also the crystalline structure is more uniform, so supposedly it makes for a much finer and uniform edge. In practice, I don't know, but if you want to read more about that, you certainly can go on to CPM's website, onto Crucible's website, sorry. They have a bunch of pages on it, and they'll explain it to you very much in detail. So let's do a couple more comparisons to the Sabenza and break this down a little bit more before we take it apart. So this knife is known for having a beautiful fall shut action, and the action opening and closing on this knife is amazing. If you notice, if you've watched a lot of Norseman reviews, people always rave about the fall shuttiness, but a lot of times when they close them, it falls and bounces off the stop pin and bounces out. Notice mine's not doing that. And a lot of people actually complain about that. They say that the knife falls shut too fast and it scares them, guillotine shut, it's going to cut their fingers, or it bounces and they just don't like it. And it always baffles me when they criticize the knife over that, because it has an adjustable pivot. So if it falls shut too fast for you, tighten the pivot. So, when I first took this knife apart, I like my knives to fall. I like the fall shut action, but I like it to be a little bit smoother, a little bit more controlled. See if I can get in camera. But yeah, so I just tightened my pivot up a little bit, put it right where I wanted it, blue Loctite, bada bing, bada boom. Never had an issue with it. Falls shut at the exact speed I want it to. If it didn't, I would adjust it. So I always felt that was kind of a weird criticism when it has an adjustable pivot. So let's go through a little more. Centering, of course, is perfect on a knife, high-end knife like this. If the centering wasn't, that would be just absolutely unacceptable. Pocket clip, milled pocket clip, doesn't dig into the cutout. Lots of space here to grab your pants. No issues there. Pocket clip has the screws on the back side. We'll talk more about that later too when I tear it down. So, but one thing I really wanted to talk about was the action in comparison to a Sabenza. So this is my Sabenza. I have carried this a lot. It's very broken in. There's no blade play or anything, but if I take the pressure off the lock bar, it will fall, and it would actually, free spin or move almost like it's on bearings. The only thing that keeps this from being a fall shut action is the pressure from the lock bar when it's closing. So one of the criticisms people make about the Norseman, and doesn't bother me, but something to keep in mind, this lock bar is very light. So this lock bar is extremely light, especially in comparison to a Sebenza. So let's compare it real quick on opening. So when this one opens, listen, hear that little dink, comes over, bink. So if you are expecting the lockup, the vault-like lockup of a Sebenza on a Norseman, you are not going to get that. Now listen to the difference. Hear that? It's like a solid thwack. That's kind of the famous Sebenza vault-like lock. So don't expect that on the Norseman, but that is part of what makes this action and closing so beautiful, is that lockup, that lock bar, is not pressing super hard on the blade, so it's able to fall freely with very little friction. So there we go. Let's take this bad boy apart, see how it works. See if I can, bam, boom. Yeah, some hardcore cinematography there. Very proud of myself with that. So first off, I wanted to point out all the screws and hardware on this are T9s, which is good size. It's not T6s, you know, big enough that they'll hold together well. It's an oddball size, which, you know, your Torx kit probably doesn't have T9s in it, but it's okay. He includes the tool when you buy it, and I'll actually show you all the stuff it comes with at the end. Realized I forgot to do that at the beginning, but it comes with T9 little torque, and it's a high quality tool, you know, straight edges, no issues. And initially, I was trying to think of why he would use T9s, but it makes sense. You don't want someone tearing apart your, you know, $1,000 knife with a $2 cheap little tool. So might as well make the Torx in kind of a oddball size that most people don't have tools for, and then include a high quality tool so that people are less likely to round out the screws when they're taking apart your high-end knife. So I think it's pretty genius, if that's what he intended. Maybe it's not, and maybe that's just, you know, me rationalizing it, but it seems to make sense to me. Anyways, on the show side scale, we have proudly made in Canada, along with the Grimsmo logo. And if you look, if I can get to focus, that maple leaf even has, you know, tooling lines in it. It's just beautifully done. So Grimsmo logo, ceramic ball bearings, and they make everything. The Grimsmo brothers make everything on this knife. So the standoffs they make, these bearing cages they make, I assume they actually order the ceramic bearings, but they make the cages. They make all the screws, all the hardware, excuse me, and, you know, the clip, titanium clip, machine milled clip, and they take the time to write Grimsmo knives on the inside of the clip. I mean, that's really part of what you're paying for, is just the attention to detail on this knife is just insane. I've never, you know, even really high dollar knives don't go to this same level and this same attention to detail. This is just, I mean, this is what you're looking for when you buy a Grimsmo knife. So internal stop pins, 2 stop pins. So you can watch some of their videos where they talk about this, but they actually use 2 stop pins. So one of them controls when the blade is closed. So this guy controls when the blade is closed. So if when they make the knife, the blade is closing too much, they can increase the size of that stop pin, move it out. If the blade is too, you know, the tip's sticking out, they can, you know, decrease the size of that stop pin, bring that in so they can dial it in exactly where they want it. Similarly, when the blade is opened, that stop pin stops it. So as you use it and it wears in, you know, people always talk about lockup, and, you know, you don't want the lockup to go all the way across and then you have weak lockup or unsafe lockup or anything like that. Or opposite, where you have almost no lockup. It's very, barely engaging. Same thing, they can just adjust that by adjusting the size of this pin. So even if you were to use one of these knives to the point where your lockup was going all the way across and, you know, hitting on the show side scale almost, you can contact Grimsmo. I'm sure they'd probably send you a pin. As far as I know, they keep track of all the knives, you know, based on number. Mine is number 1912. You can see that right there. But they keep track of what size pins they send out with each knife. So if you were to contact them and say, hey, you know, I've had this knife forever, my lockup now is way too late, they can say, oh, well, I know that this size pin is in there. You maybe send the knife back and they do it for you, or maybe they'd be nice enough to just mail you a pin that's, you know, a couple thousandths bigger, and bada bing, your lockup is fixed. Or you send it to them and they replace the pin, and then, you know, it's fixed. Either way, it's a very simple and smart way to address, you know, adjusting the lockup and the closure. So very genius. I've never seen two stop pins before. Makes a lot of sense to me. So that's the knife all torn apart. Hinderer-esque lock bar stabilizer, so you can't overextend this lock. What else? Ceramic detent, and they actually flatten the detent. So instead of having just like a normal detent ball, they take the ball and flatten it. And the methodology behind that, or the idea behind that, is that a larger surface going across the smooth face of this knife blade will actually have less resistance than a rounded, sharp one possibly digging in. So just allows for smoother opening and closing. Also note the ramp right here on the blade for the detent. But anyways, awesome knife. This is one of the things when you buy a Norseman, this is kind of what you're getting into, just all the attention to detail, the beautiful CNC machine work. And, you know, not many other knife companies go to this amount of detail on the inside. So it's really something, you know, knife addicts like me really appreciate. When you take a knife apart and you see all this, it's like, you know, having Easter eggs everywhere in a video game. It's just awesome. So, all right, let's do a little more cinematography. We'll get it back together and I'll do some final conclusions. And we're back. All right, I realized there's a couple things I forgot in the first part, so I'll try and run through them real quick. So I did not take a weight on this guy. I can tell you it's 5 ounces, but just so you believe me, well, bam, 5 ounces. Also, when you purchase this, it comes with this awesome tactical Tupperware. Boom. And Grimsmo Brothers do cut this foam out, do all that jazz. Comes with your tool, 10-weight nano oil, the card signed by both of them with some info on it, which is very cool. Also comes with your awesome sticker you can put on the back of your truck so that anyone behind you knows that you have a Yeti, a Hemi, and a Grimsmo knife. So, very cool. I also said, I believe, that the Sabenza has a 3.5-inch blade, which it does, and a 4.5-inch handle, which it does, which adds up to 8.5 inches, which it does not. It's actually an 8-inch blade. Grimsmo is just over 8.5, which is why it's a little bit bigger, and this is a little smaller. I didn't do math very well, so that was that. Let's see. Final conclusions, likes, dislikes. I mean, as you can see from the review, I love this knife. There's not much I don't like about it. I did not think I would actually like the blade shape, but I do. I love these tooling marks. You can kind of feel them, but they make no difference in use. I think it's awesome. So a lot of people don't like the blade shape, don't like tooling marks. I love it. Yeah, dislikes. I don't have really, there's not much to dislike about this. I wish it was cheaper. I wish it was easier to get a hold of. I wish that the stop pin, internal stop pins didn't have that gap right there for pocket lint stuff to get into. But, I mean, you can't change that without changing the design. Honestly, I don't know what else I would change on this. So, it's just a great knife. Wish it was a little cheaper. Wish the blade steel. I wish the blade steel was a CPM 20 or a 20 CV or M390 or a super steel. At this price point, I would much rather have a super steel. Oh, sharpening. A lot of people ask about sharpening on these. For me, this is not a super difficult knife to sharpen. I thought it would be. I have a KME. I didn't try it on this. I don't use it that much. I mostly use a Ken Onion work sharp with a blade grinder attachment. So it's a 1 by 18 inch belt. And you just sharpen it in two states, like you're sharpening two knives. You have two separate blades you sharpen. Don't round out your tip, so don't go too far into this tip. Treat this the same way as you treat this tip when you're sharpening, and you won't round it off and screw it up. So it hasn't been bad for me at all. I was able to get a beautiful mirror polish. This is razor sharp. It's held an edge great. I'm very pleased with it. So if you are not a very good sharpener, or all you have is a bench stone, then yeah, this is going to be a booger to sharpen. But if you have any type of guided sharpening system, you should be okay. I know people do it with KMEs all the time. So it works great for me on a belt type system. And I know from the factory, Eric sharpens all the knives, I believe, or at least he used to. And they have a 2x72 blade grinder, and they split the belt, so it's actually a 1 inch by 72 inch. So it's the same. The work sharp with the blade grinder is a 1 inch by 18 inch belt, so same type of thing. But not very difficult to sharpen. At least in my eyes, it was not that bad. Not nearly as difficult as I expected. So, but is it worth the money? Should you buy this knife for $900? So you can get them on the website. You just have to watch it. They have a spot where they will post knives for sale periodically. Lately, they've been posting maybe one a week. They usually go within a couple hours or within the day. I haven't seen one last through the day usually. You can also find them on eBay, on the secondary market, usually for a little bit more. But on the website, they're usually $900, $925 for the basic one like this. Then usually $940 or so for something with some fancy milling and different colors and whatnot. You can also sign up for the lottery. They have a lottery on their website. You put your email in. When they finish a knife, I think that's how they sell most of their knives. When they finish them, they will put them in there. They'll send you an email, randomly draw one of the emails that's on there, and then send the lucky winner a link to purchase the knife if they so choose. If not, then they go down to the next person, and so on and so forth. So for me, when I look at this knife, I see a story. I don't just see the knife. So for me, it has, like a Nut and Fancy would say, a second kind of cool. When I look at this, I remember John Grimsmo going to his first blade show, and he didn't have a pivot that fit. He had just gotten the first couple prototypes of this knife, and he had like a Home Depot bolt as a pivot through here with a nut on it, and he took it around and was showing all the knife makers there, getting advice and whatnot. He started in his garage with, I think, like a Harbor Freight milling machine that he kind of jerry-rigged to make a CNC machine, and then eventually got a Tormac and went up from there. And now he's on his, I think, their second building with, multiple six-figure CNC machines. So, this knife to me, it tells a story. It tells John Grimsmo's story. And, looking at it, I remember when he started making his own bearing cages. I remember when he switched the screws from the outside of this pocket clip to the inside. I remember when he changed the logo. I remember when he added the hinder lock bar stabilizer. I remember when he started making his own hardware. I look at this and I see all those stories that I've watched through the years on his YouTube channel. So, and it's just, if you're into CNC or you're a hardcore knife addict, then, this is an awesome knife. This is definitely worth the money. If you're not hardcore into knives and you don't, already have a Sabenza or an XM18 and you haven't kind of gone through the whole knife addict process, then, maybe this is not the one to start with. Maybe you should look at getting a Sabenza first, or, kind of branching out before you spend $900 on a knife. But for me, this was absolutely worth it. And when I came home, I got I was at work, I got the notification that it showed up, and I was driving home, and I was actually nervous, not more nervous than excited, because I built this knife up so much in my mind, through the years watching it, and it had been a grail knife for me. I'd wanted it for so long. And I was nervous that I'd get home and I had such high expectations that I'd be disappointed. And when I opened it up, started messing with it, it met all of my expectations. I was not disappointed whatsoever. And in fact, when I handed it to my wife, and she opened it up, messed with it, looked at it, she actually said, I guess I can kind of see why this knife is so expensive. So, and I have a couple other knives I might do some reviews on that are in this price range or more, that I was not, that did not meet my expectations, that I was disappointed in. So I'm not just justifying the amount of money I spent on this knife. I'm saying that this knife met my expectations. Will it meet yours? I don't know. But if you're a hardcore fan of the Grimsmo brothers, I encourage you to at least watch some of those videos before you consider buying this knife. But if you have and you want this knife and it's a grail knife for you, pick it up. I don't think you'll regret it. That's it. I will see you next time.